Hi, it's me. I'm Bea Cupin, and this is 36 Years, where we talk about Philippine politics, news, and democracy. On May 9, the Philippines elected Ferdinand Marcos Jr. as president. He is the second Marcos to hold the post, the first being his father and namesake, the dictator who was ousted from power on February 25, 1986, in the People Power Revolution. That was 36 years ago. Here we try to answer the question, where is Philippine democracy heading 36 years after the revolution? Welcome to 36 Years, available on Rappler's social media pages and on wherever you listen to podcasts. This week in Philippine politics and news, the killing of a journalist see twists and turns, and why everyone, including non journalists, should pay attention to this case. There are also new appointments, former generals for the most part, in the Marcos administration, and in connection to the latter, a DOH still without a chief. Welcome to 36 Years, and we're still talking about the first 100 days of the Marcos administration. If you've been sticking closely to the news, you wouldn't be surprised by this summary. A lot and not much has happened in the first 3 months of the Marcos administration. We have more stories and opinion pieces on that over on Rappler.com, so you can visit that. But in this episode, we'll be talking about something that surprisingly we haven't been talking about on 36 years, the arts and Philippine politics. Specifically, we'll be talking about literature and poetry. Our guest is someone I've known for years, and I mean years, I'm not exaggerating. Alfonso Manalastas is a poet and a writer, but is most known, especially in online circles, for his spoken word performances. I know him from our younger years, as children from a city called Butuan. So don't worry, hindi kami magbisaya. Hindi nagbisaya in this episode, not a lot. We'll be talking to Alfonso about poetry, literature, and how those disciplines and arts figure or do not figure in our political system. Spoiler alert, they do. But anyway, first the headlines. Indoor mask wearing will soon be voluntary in the Philippines, with President Marcos set to issue an executive order formalizing the move. Upon the issuance of the EO, mask wearing would still be required in public transportation as well as medical facilities. In September, recall that Marcos okayed the voluntary wearing of masks outdoors. Medical experts, of course, have opposed the move, both the September EO and the new EO, to lift indoor mask mandates. Tourism Secretary Cristina Frasco, who made the announcement on the lifting of indoor mask requirements, said this was done to, quote, allow our country to be at par with our ASEAN neighbors who have long liberalized their mask mandates. And yes, it was the tourism chief who made the announcement and not an official from the health department. Besides, Marcos has yet to appoint a DOH secretary. Speaking of the DOH, President Marcos appoints Camilo Cascolan, former chief of the Philippine National Police and a military academy graduate, as Undersecretary of the Health Department. To nobody's surprise, the appointment has alarmed many, including health workers groups. Cascolan, after all, enters the Department of Health again without a full-time secretary at its helm. 3 months into the new administration, it's only headed by an officer in charge, Undersecretary Rosario Vergere. The former police general defended himself by pointing out that the health department's work isn't just about medical knowledge, but also about, quote, balancing science and management and strategy. Funnily enough, neither the health department nor Cascolan have explained the latter's role in the department. Aside from Cascolan, several former generals from the police and the military are new additions to the Marcos administration. Retired Major General Juvie Max Uy is Deputy Commissioner of the Bureau of Customs. Two generals who were most prominent during the administration of the late Benigno Aquino III also now hold key positions in the Marcos admin. We have former AFP Chief Gregorio Catapang, who is the Bureau of Corrections Chief, and retired Police General Moro Lazo, who takes over the Philippine Drug Enforcement Agency. To be clear, for context, seeing retired generals take on posts in the bureaucracy is nothing new, but that's another issue altogether, and we might talk about that here on 36 Years soon. The new appointments follow two major news events. The PDA shakeup happens on the heels of the controversial arrest of Justice Secretary Jesus Crispin Boyeng Remulla's son, Juanito Jose, by agencies led by the PDEA. Katapang meanwhile stepped in after Rimulya suspended Gerald Bantag, former Director General of the Bucor, because the alleged middleman in the killing of firebrand journalist Percy Lapid had supposedly died while inside the new Bilibid prison. For updates on these developing stories and for more on Percy Lapid, visit Rappler.com. Now, on to the interview. Thank you, Alfonso, for joining us. Kahit na medyo lisod ang time. Well, it's not that hard, right? It's
Not too
steady
bad.
lang.
Not too bad.
Not
Yeah.
too bad. Madadara. It's a decent time for both you and me. So yeah,
Mm-mm.
I will start with a admittedly difficult question. Diretso na ta sa hard question right away. Because okay, the context being like this show, we've been talking to political scientists, politicians even, so mas obvious ang connection between ilahang work, their work, and democracy. Um, my thesis statement is obviously that literature does have a role in democracy, but I want to ask you, what role do you think literature plays in democracy, in Philippine democracy specifically?
Well, I guess for starters, if you look back decades ago, you also look at the importance that cultural capital has played not only in terms of literature itself, like yung kung anong mga sinusulat, kung anong mga pinipinta, kung anong mga pelikula ang ginagawa, but also in terms of the cultural capital bestowed uniquely upon artists and how they navigate and negotiate using that currency, that cultural capital. Kasi like even if you look back to 1975 when I believe when Nick Joaquin was conferred into the Order of the National Artists, and he used that acceptance as bargaining chip in order to negotiate the release of his friend Pete Lacaba, who was a political prisoner at that time. He forced the Marcoses to release Lacaba, who was detained without any, from what I remember, without any legal basis. And the Marcoses yielded and released Pete Lacaba under that sort of condition that Nick Joaquin made before he accepted the National Artist Award. So you see, it's not just in terms of like defining history or using literature, for example, as markers of history, kasi minsan tumitingin tayo sa mga likha as basis for what transpired in that particular political and social context during the time. Like, this is something that I like telling people because it was something that was shared by Elaine Castillo, who's the author of America is Not the Heart. She talked about how the origin of Cinderella was French, the writer was French, but she also asked the question, bakit may pumpkin na imahe sa Cinderella na story, di ba? When pumpkins weren't endemic in France at the time. And it was because during the same time, French was aggressive in its colonization of several African countries, and wherein pumpkin was the main food source. So dinadala nila sa France, naging staple siya na imahe, pero hindi ibig sabihin na endemic siya sa France. So para siyang ganon, hindi siya tungkol, like even when you write stories, for example, na hindi necessarily tungkol sa political context na pinanggagalingan ng kwento, pero dahil pumupulot ito ng mga imahe, ng mga impluensya mula sa kontekstong iyon, nagiging markers of history sila. But of course, art, literature, these things, film especially, can also be tools. The way, for example, Meet in Malacanang was can very easily argued as a propaganda film, and yet it's also easy for people supporting it to argue that it's just a film, that there is nothing malicious about it, and if there is, so what? It's just a film. But you see, as an artifact, as a cultural artifact, it's important because it helps define people's political sensibilities. It helps, especially if it either satirizes or portrays a historical moment, then it can also be a source of information. People can assume that the things that transpired in these works are true. So it's always relevant in that way because they're drivers of conversation, and conversations, in a way, help influence people's political preferences. They help
Yeah.
influence people's artistic sensibilities, things like that, things that all exist within this, large ecosystem,
Yeah.
that do reflect, that do manifest in something tangible eventually, like voting a public
Yeah.
official, like policy making, things like that.
Yeah. I like how you brought that up, yung parang kumbaga art and literature can both form and inform
Yeah.
public sentiment. Like, hindi lang siya vacuum. Although I think, at least in our social circles or our echo chambers, the sentiment is absolutely, that literature isn't just or movies or film, music even. Hindi lang siya film lang yan, kanta lang yan. Parang it exists in a society. Charot. Hindi. Pero parang, yun nga, parang it both captures political sentiment, but also it pushes
Yeah.
forward a
Yeah.
specific narrative that obviously in this case one certain senator wants to push towards the public.
Yeah. Do we
Yeah.
discuss that? I'm kidding.
Di, pero meron akong tanong connected to that, pero later on na siguro. Siguro yung, kasi nabanggit mo na, and hopefully people who listen to this or watch this are already familiar with the work of Pete Lacaba. Pero kung hindi kayo familiar, I will link you resources as to who he is. Although madali na naman i-google kung sino si Pete Lacaba, pero para mabasa nyo rin ang mga gawa niya, bakit siya nakulong. Pero nabanggit na rin ni Alfonso, no, yung National Artist na award. And it connects to one of my questions here na parang yung power ng art, ng literature, alam na alam yun ng mga Marcoses. As in, expert sila doon. Obviously, Imelda held on to the idea of beauty and glory. And that was part of I wouldn't say na it kept them in power, but it certainly fueled into the Marcos narrative, di ba? Yung
Yeah.
grandeur of the
Legacy.
Marcoses. Yeah, the
Yeah.
legacy and legacy here, not necessarily a positive or just the neutral term, the legacy,
Yeah.
the Marcos legacy. And because by virtue of the fact na 21 years si Ferdinand Marcos the first, the father of the current president in power, malaki ang influence nila sa Philippine culture, 'di ba? Kasi 20 years nga in power. And in fact, maraming artifacts. In example, yun nga, yung national artist. How do we make sense of that? Na a lot of the art that we could a lot of the things that we sometimes take for granted, pero kung na yung national artist, parang national artist. And then you realize na, oh, this is how it started, or this was the story of its origin. How do we come to sense with that? And how, like, beauty was produced from those years. From years of absolute terror and violence, talking about the martial law years, of course. Like, how, may pag-way ba? Parang, should we feel guilty about consuming art from that era, or reaping the benefits of what was laid out siguro during those years?
For that one, I think it's important talaga ang education. Kasi these are things that need to be contextualized. Like, we can appreciate them the same way, it's very easy, for example, for supporters of the Marcoses to argue that you shouldn't get a heart transplant from the heart center, or you shouldn't cross the San Juanico Bridge because these were products of the martial law years, which don't make sense, because all the more we should seize them and take charge of them, because they were in a way sort of dethrone the myth behind them, because they were used against us for so long. They were used as ammunition in order to justify the continuing fascism, for example, of the Marcoses. Like it's okay if people are getting killed because at least we have a bridge, at least we have a heart center. So it's kind of like it's the same logic with art, especially art that's like meant to be politically neutral. Although I do not think that the Marcoses necessarily produced films that they intended to be neutral. I do think that everything, even the ones that are distinctly apolitical, were still in ways created to fuel their legacy, to fuel
Yeah.
their the whole reputation of the Marcoses being pioneers and leaders of culture and art. And obviously these things are complicated, but at the same time, this is why education is important, going back to my first point, because there's always a need to contextualize, like if it's a film, if it's a propaganda film that turned out to be beautiful, for example, we don't just want it in the hands of people who are well-meaning, who are wide-eyed, who might take information at face
Yeah.
value, um, without necessarily contextualizing them. So yun important siya. Tsaka yung meta context is important, not just like the narrative of the work, not just the images used in the work, but also the political context of how it was created and when it was created and why it was created. So those things I think are important. And I do agree naman na in order to fully appreciate a piece of work, you need to contextualize it. You need to, in a way, academize it, which is obviously a hard thing to demand from vast audiences. But if we're talking about movies, for example, that are naman na archived na, so parang we're talking about hindi na mass consumption. You're talking about people rewatching them in 2022 context. I think
Yeah.
context can be workable, definitely. And parang we go back always to the Adornian understanding of art and civilization, how civilization itself cannot redeem us from the oppression that civilization itself has perpetuated. Like so many people have died in the hands of the Marcoses while the Marcoses were beautifying the Philippines, right? So there is a lot of beauty there. That can be argued as a kind of civilization, a kind of worthy sacrifice. It's okay to have killed so many people because look at how beautiful we've made this country, which I argue isn't, by the way. Um, but like what Adorno said, that cannot redeem us from the oppression that beauty has created. What were the costs? How many sacrifices had to be made in order to achieve such beauty?
Yeah. You discussed kanina na you touched on the importance of context, and yung una kong naalala when you talked about the Marcoses and the context of the art that they push forward and that they utilize was the campaign. During the campaign, two songs were on loop, and as someone who covered the Marcos campaign, I meant they were on loop. Syempre yung isa doon yung Umagang Kay Ganda, na in the millennial and Gen Z context, dapat kanta siya na ginamit ng morning show ng ABS-CBN. Pero na-shutdown na yung morning show na yun nung na-shutdown yung ABS-CBN. And in the campaign, it was used liberally by Bongbong Marcos, by Tony Gonzaga actually. Pero more than that, yung um, ay shucks. The song, the
I
title
forgot the
suddenly
name.
slips my mind.
Yeah.
Um,
Yung kinanta
the
to nila,
the hymn.
kinanta
Yeah.
to um, nina Roberto Senia, which saddened me.
Yeah.
Um,
Bagong Lipunan, there you go,
yeah.
obviously. Bagong
Mhm.
Lipunan. And I just remember how objectively catchy it was, kung catchiness lang, but it was also difficult to to really expound on the context without sounding tiring. And I'm not asking you for a solution, ha, pero yung what I wonder lang is, why is it so hard to bakit ang hirap bitbitin ng kontekstong yon? Bakit ang bilis niyang nawala sa collective memory natin to think na 36 years ago lang naman lang. I know that's a long time. That can be a long time. But
Yeah.
it's only been 36 years since the revolution. Bakit parang within those 36 years, bakit na-cleanse agad yung meaning of bagong
Yeah.
lipunan?
I feel like parang twofolds. There's definitely a fault in our neoliberal education. I feel like there wasn't enough emphasis on these crimes. Like you go to Germany, you talk about the
Yeah.
Holocaust, parang sobrang stringent, not like across all fronts then, not just in terms of education, media, culture, but also actual official policies like
Yeah.
openly endorsing Nazism, for example, can land you in jail, things like that. We don't have any version of that here. Um, we were very we were very kind to our
Yeah.
oppressors,
Yeah.
and I feel like kind of fault. That kindness was valorized during the time, right? Like we were the
Mm.
bloodless revolution, which wasn't
Yeah.
bloodless by the way.
I
We were Cory famously allowed the Marcoses to sort of just just um, take them to Hawaii, let us handle the government, things like that. There's nothing punitive in a way in how we approach our oppressors, and that was valorized. That idea of kindness, of benevolence,
turning
of
the other cheek.
bloodlessness, yeah, was sort of valorized in American media, locally.
Mm.
That doesn't harm our enemies. Um, therefore, just let them be as long as they don't meddle with us. And of course, they will meddle with us. We eventually die, and they eventually come back, and they can meddle with us again. But also, conversely, just massive, well-oiled disinformation machinery was very integral. I remember back in 2010, when
Yeah.
Pinoy was elected, all of these anti-Marcos sentiments were so strong and vibrant at the time. That's only 12 years ago. Um,
Yeah.
and the same sentiment no longer reflects on the ballot today.
Yeah.
And I think the easy answer to that is because the Marcoses were very hardworking in coming
Yeah.
back. That in terms of rehabilitating their image, they've been spending decades to do that. And now with the technology that we have, with the kind of social media platforms that we have, it's gotten so much easier to spread misinformation. It's gotten so much easier for them to twist the narrative and push their version of history. And I
Yeah.
think that's why it's so easy to forget. I mean, even I didn't realize that Maharlika was a politically loaded term until quite recently
Yeah.
when
Yeah.
a certain publication sprouted called
Yeah.
Maharlika, and then some of the older writers were like, oh,
Yeah.
this terminology was integral to the Marcos regime because he wanted to rename the Philippines Maharlika. That was the name of
Yeah.
the new society that he was
Yeah.
building. And I didn't even know that. And I feel like I'm nearing my 30s, and I'm supposed to know that, but I didn't. So
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
definitely both. It's definitely a lack
Yeah.
of education and punitive measures, and a push on the other side for disinformation and things like that.
Yeah. Yeah. Without meaning to bash or to belittle yung shared education, para tayo nag-homeschool. Hindi. Alfonso and I went to the
Yeah,
same high school.
yeah.
And this is not unique to the school that we
Mm-mm,
went to, but like,
mm-mm,
I absolutely learned nothing. Not
mm-mm,
like, I just knew there as a fact na nagka-martial law, na
mm-mm,
nagkaroon ng Ferdinand Marcos Sr. as president.
mm-mm,
Uh, he ruled for many years, and I don't remember that it was explained to me why exactly.
mm-mm,
Dalawang dekada siya he was in power. It wasn't really expounded on na bakit nga ba 21 years siya in power.
mm-mm.
Why did he flee? Like, you get what I mean? Like, it wasn't really, I don't know, was it different for you? Parang,
No, it's
konti lang
definitely
naman
the
yung difference.
same. I just remember him to have been the president the longest. He was like vaguely bad because he took away democracy, but not so much
Yeah.
bad in terms of like how what it took for him to take away that democracy. like the killings, the desaparecidos, things like that.
Yeah.
So definitely not
Yeah. Because
under discussed.
I remember in college when I studied Philippine history na parang may gulat factor na oh damn. Like the finer details of like the student activists during that time, and then
Mm-mm.
after college lalo parang nung professional na ako parang
Mm-mm.
oh
Worse, yeah.
I did not know those details. And actually, until literally months ago, while I was reading a book, uh, not so, yeah, of like detailing a lot of the smaller side stories of the Marcos regime. Parang
Mm-mm.
we did not know this. So in connection to what you said, nga, no, parang it's not just na the popular notion is that this was a 6 year, 10 year project of the Marcoses, but really it's a 36 year project
Yeah.
of the Marcoses na
Mm-mm.
itong comeback hindi lang disinformation, hindi lang propaganda nila, pero ano na rin hindi ko nga alam I don't know unsa for you ang term, like is it
Um,
complacency on our part?
it's definitely a mix of many things. I do think that there
Yeah,
is complacency, that there have been complacency, and I feel like for so long we rested on our laurels, kumbaga, na parang, okay na
yeah,
to. We got rid of them once. They're never gonna
yeah.
get back
Hindi
because
na bumalik.
grabe siya ka-imposible. Pero it happened. So
Yeah,
it's definitely
yeah. No,
complacency.
and also talking about yung difficult top, feeling ko rin isa ring factor ka ng lisod to talk about, or it's hard to talk about difficult topics because part of me thinks na baka some of our history teachers did not teach us about the human rights violations, either because they didn't know about it themselves, which is a shame, or maybe they were afraid to teach young children. Actually, hindi na young children, teenagers.
Yeah.
Maybe they were afraid to teach us about the horrors of those years. I'm not sure.
I'm not well, I feel like I don't wanna sort of individualize the problem to like
Yeah.
history teachers kasi feeling ko nanggagaling lang din sila sa kung ano yung prescribed at kung ano
Yeah.
yung nakasanayan nila. And so I
Yeah.
feel like there needed to be like a systematic
Yeah.
overhaul na kailangan talagang
Absolutely.
i-push siya from like on a structural level, hindi lang, individual, hoping na the individual teachers will
Yeah.
somehow
We'll step
like,
up.
be right enough. Yeah, yeah,
Oo, kasi caveat din yun nga, parang we all know that teachers in the Philippines, make it private or public, like a lot of them are overworked. So like
yeah,
it's hard to ask more of them if they're already
yeah,
flooded with
yeah.
work. And also to touch on uncomfortable topics, I think one of the I mentioned this in another episode, no? Parang one of the things that calling the EDSA revolution a bloodless revolution, like you ignore the years, the decades of hard work that activists, um, some people who never imagined themselves to be activists one day, may mga
Mm,
taong nag-underground na hindi nila
mm,
akalain na mag-underground sila, but they were pushed to it and they
mm.
sacrificed their lives. And I think calling it a bloodless revolution sort of, and I don't think it negates it, pero parang
Yeah, yeah.
it pushes them towards the background lang.
Yeah, and
Parang,
parang it reinforces that whole narrative that was valorized nga in the past that has allowed the Marcoses to come back. Na parang, oh,
mm,
even if wala naman tayong na sasagasaang mga activists in the past by calling it a bloodless revolution, assuming wala tayong nasasagasaan, which obviously we do.
yeah,
Parang it's still pushing a narrative that that whitewashes the whole process of having removed them from power. And it is the
yeah,
same, exact same, it is the exact same narrative that has allowed them to come back. Like,
yeah,
um, like parang, what's stopping them from coming back? A bloodless revolution? Parang ganun.
yeah,
Like, we're not gonna
yeah.
fight them anyway.
Yeah, yeah. Talking about them coming back, obviously at this point, the day we're recording this, magfo 4 months na, or definitely more than 100 days na
Mm,
si, I have to say this out loud, sorry Alfonso, but President Ferdinand Marcos Jr.
yeah.
has the fact that he's president. Has it sunk in? With I mean, for anyone who might not know Alfonso, but I'm sure if you're a person on the internet, you know who he is. Like, you've been very vocal, diba, of where you stand in the context of the May 2022 elections. Like, has it sunk in that he's a Marcos is back in Malacanang?
Um, I look at it more as an extension of the previous administration, especially because
Mm.
they have been working together for for the 2022 election, for example. Yun Sarah and Bongbong as running mates. Um, there have been a lot of similar political stances coming from both administrations. And so it does feel like an extension of the last one. And the killings have, I mean, like, I know the same in several parts of the country working with peasant activists. I know
Mm.
that the same harassments, the same militarization is still happening. I know of people who get arrested over trumped up charges still because of
Yeah.
political reasons. So it's definite. It like has it sank in. Para siyang nauna yung pag-sink in. Parang nag-sink in siya nung Duterte administration pa lang. Pero
Yeah.
it's more of like, oh, we get like 6 more years of this, rather
Yeah.
than, oh, we get 6 new years of like something else entirely. But
Yeah.
also, obviously there are clear differences. Like Marcos is so much more indulgent, and we see that sensationalized in the media. Him in Singapore watching car races, for example. So things like that we didn't really witness from the previous administration so much. So so there are definite disparities here and there, but it certainly feels like an extension. Maybe because more or less the same people are in power.
Yeah. And I think isang factor din dun, para the entry of one Ferdinand Marcos Jr., uh, hindi siya vacuum na as if, di ba, parang Duterte out, Marcos in. He benefits a lot from what was established during President Rodrigo Duterte's administration. For example, kunwari, short of siguro doing like, God forbid, di ba, parang canceling or sorry, not refusing to give the franchise of a media giant. Parang what anything that this administration does might seem tame in comparison to the media, for example. And I say
Mm-mm.
this, of course, with
Mm-mm.
taga-media ako, so biased ako
Mm-mm.
in that sense. Pero parang
Mm-mm.
kung baga nilatag na niya kasi nilatag na ni President Duterte yung distrust in the media,
Yeah,
um,
yeah,
the rise of alternative voices in the person of propagandists who claim to be vloggers or bloggers. So parang
yeah.
na-normalize na yun. Ayoko sabihin yun, pero I think the reality is, andyan na
Mm-mm.
sila eh. Andyan na yung
Uh-uh.
part na siya ng ecosystem ng social media at media natin. So parang,
Yeah. He
yeah.
doesn't have to work as hard anymore to capture the
Exactly.
collective imagination. Kasi nalatag na
Exactly.
nga. Tama.
It's
Yeah.
already there. And then if you see the personalities who were rabid or really passionately pro Rodrigo Duterte personalities in the past, they've either switched, picked a side or something, or ngayon pro Marcos na rin sila kahit na
Mm.
dati hindi naman talaga sila
Yeah.
Marcos loyalist in the classical sense. May classical sense ng Marcos OG Marcos law.
Old
You know what I
Marx
mean? Pero
fans.
you see them shifting to where the power is, and
Yeah, yeah.
it's scarier for me,
Which is
honestly.
also kind of telling. Para
Yeah,
how do you, trust the credibility of these people when, they're simply, pandering to whoever's in power. So like,
yeah,
sorry, that's just me being, catty.
yeah. No, but yun nga, parang I think whenever people ask me kasi na, oh, how is it for the media under President Marcos, I always have to parang kumbaga contextualize it. Kasi kung absolute terms lang, hindi talaga siya kasing lala. But then again, you're comparing it to the latter years of the Duterte admin kung kailan wala ng
Yeah.
ABS-CBN.
So like, the bar is low. The bar is
Yun nga,
low.
the bar is so low, and I think that's something that we have to, hindi na to connected necessarily to literature and poetry, no? Pero I think that's something that you have to be very careful about, di ba? Parang
Yeah.
hindi tayo pwedeng, parang dili tama nga, musugot rata nga, ay shocks, compared to last admin, okay na ni siya, like,
Yeah. Yeah.
that shouldn't be something that
But at
we're
least he's
okay.
articulate somehow. I'm like, what? What
They're
universe are
complete
you in?
sentences, I think. Yeah, as the new Malacanang reporter, that is a huge relief to me. That his speeches are in complete
Yeah, yeah,
sentences, and
yeah.
it's much
But
easier to decipher
yeah,
what he's saying.
yeah. Um,
I wonder. Okay, this. I don't know if you're. This is a difficult question in the sense now we have the advantage of sitting in front of our computers right now. But in terms of the media industry, tayong Latin di. Pero in terms of artistry, do you think collectively, I don't know if ikaw na bahala mag-define, collectively as individuals, have we done enough? Hindi pala we, sorry, hindi ako artist. Sinama ko sarili ko. Have artists done enough to, to siguro resist, before that question pala, why is activism and being an artist, they seem to be very intertwined, or parang it's not unusual to see the artist as an activist and an activist as the artist as well.
well, to answer that one first, I guess
Yeah,
because kasi parang art naman as a medium is all about self-expression, right? So it's
yeah,
about expressing what you feel most strongly about, and the things that we feel most strongly about, especially these days, tend to be the things that sort of oppress us. And so
yeah,
it's so easy to parang like the point A to point B is kind of like short and quick. I
mm,
guess that's like the short answer. But I guess also because good art cannot thrive without, without good politics,
yeah,
you can't just create even when you're an artist, for example, who is decidedly apolitical. That choice itself is a political decision, and that
yeah,
makes your work
yeah,
um, you know, decidedly political then. And so I feel like it's so easy for like there are tons of artists, but I feel like the ones that always sort of sprout and that gain some kind of relevance are the ones that are political because they have something meaningful to say. I think it's
yeah,
as easy as that. You can have skill in terms of like visual arts, for example, in terms of poetry. You can
yeah,
have, the virtuosity can be there, but
yeah,
when you have nothing meaningful to say, then it will not move people.
yeah,
And it's the ones that move people that sort of remain within the sphere of, of social relevance,
yeah,
of political conversations, and therefore it's so easy to tie them together. And there are, some of the best artists I know,
yeah,
most of the best artists I know are,
yeah,
very political people. They're activists.
yeah,
Um, I think I think that's, the the essentially why that's happening.
yeah,
Um,
yeah,
but what was your other question? Oh, have artists done enough? Do I think?
yeah, yeah, yeah,
Um,
yeah, yeah,
in terms of pushback, it's so hard to quantify, but
yeah,
like artists have been working very hard even before the
yeah,
Marcoses returned to
yeah,
power. And I don't know if it's a matter of doing enough because I don't think it'll ever be enough.
yeah,
Even if we achieve um, certain milestones, for example, like in 1986, for example, like when the Marcoses left power, there was still so much work to be done for artists. There was a lot of, um, there was a lot, so much work had to be created in order to capture that time in history, to capture the sentiment of the people during that time. So I don't think it'll ever be enough, but artists have been working very hard, I would say. Um,
yeah,
Artists not just operating as artists as well, but ito na nga yung sinasabi nila na parang, kumbaga, your responsibility is not limited within your medium, right? Na parang you have
yeah,
to transcend that. You have to take part in the larger political life that exists outside of craft. And that's what a lot of artists have been doing. And parang art is labor as well as activism. Cultural work is labor. Organizing is labor. So the artist activists I know are very very tired, but still
yeah,
pushing through. So like,
yeah,
um, and like they're
yeah,
getting harassed. I mean, like the artist
yeah,
activists in Tinang, for example, who were arrested along with the peasant farmers. It's like it's just so much, like, so much to
yeah.
deal with. Yeah.
Yeah.
And art doesn't
And
pay. So like you're
yeah,
putting in so much work. Activism, obviously, you do it for free. Art doesn't
yeah,
pay. And so it's just so much, just so much.
yeah. Yeah. I mean, tsaka bukod pa dyan na kumbaga yung kalaban, I put that in quotes kasi
Mm-mm.
marami sila. Or parang in a lot of, most of the time, they're well-oiled, they're well-funded. And that's not a privilege, obviously, that the average artist,
Yeah,
most artists, actually, hindi lang average artist,
yeah,
most,
yeah.
the
Even
overwhelming majority of artists
yeah.
have, di ba? Parang just
Mm.
the social, the financial capital um, to battle, like, my
Yeah,
God,
tsaka it's so
armies
easy
of
to, like
disinformation.
even when they fight back with when the Kalaban fights back with art and culture as well, like with Made in Malacanang nga,
Yeah.
para it's so easy to grease their way through the bureaucratic process. So they just, I mean, like, it was one of the, for a full length film, it took them no time at all to create it, and
Yeah.
it was well funded. It appeared in so many cinemas.
Yeah.
They gave away tickets, and I know people who were given tickets, so I know that they gave away
Yeah.
tickets. Things like that. So like, even the the meager, modest aspiration
Yeah.
of the artist to simply be seen and witnessed and enjoyed by an
Uh-uh.
audience is something that they have already.
Yeah. That's important, an important thing to note, kasi baka people are not familiar. Sobrang mapolitika yung pagpasok pa rin ng isang film sa isang cinema. I
Mm-mm. Yeah.
mean,
Mm-mm.
matinding negotiation yan, kung hindi
Mm-mm.
negotiation. And by negotiation, I mean words and money.
Yeah.
Hindi basta-basta hindi lang yung pag-fund ng movie ha, pero yung distribution itself. So,
Yeah.
that's absolutely true. The fact that it was screened in a lot of theaters
In
says a lot about the
Butuan.
funding.
Yeah.
Ay, niyawan,
Well,
niyawan siya sa,
niabot siya sa Butuan. When
niyawan siya sa
well, I don't
Butuan.
know anybody who watched it, but I'm sure a lot did. So
Yeah. I personally do not know people who watch it deliberately, but that could be a function of my echo chamber, so that doesn't
same,
really
same.
um say anything. Speaking of nabanggit na rin natin kanina, no, parang yung overwhelming sentiment that I get, especially from the last episode where I spoke to Filipino American immigrants who one the two of them actually, yung isa fled after being arrested in the Philippines during martial law. The other guest that I had last week, her parents fled Mindanao actually.
Mm.
What is now the Bangsamoro region, because of the lack of economic opportunity during the first Marcos presidency. No? So, yung sentiment, especially ng mga activists during the martial law years, is that they're shocked. Hindi lang dahil nanalo si Bongbong, hindi lang yon, pero parang nagulat sila na kailangan pa pala nilang lumaban ulit. Because I think, 36 years ago, there was parang when I talked to several of them, the general answer when I asked how it felt was relief. Just relief na parang, we did it. Okay
Yeah.
na to, tapos na. Pwede na mag-retire. And a lot of them did actually retire from activism. If
Yeah.
I don't think I don't think you can actually fully retire from
Mhm.
activism. Pero kumbaga, hindi na sila,
Hindi na.
hindi na siya, dili na siya daily grind. You
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
it becomes like a once a month thing, once a week thing, because your biggest battle has already been won. So,
Yeah.
parang the sentiment when Bongbong Marcos won as president was the shock na parang,
Mm-mm.
I have to fight again.
Yeah.
So I put in my notes that this can sound very romantic, no? Kung, na di ba na parang, 36 years later, parang, he's back on the streets again, fighting the same battle. But I think that's quite sad, actually.
Yeah. It's quite tragic because
Di ba?
he shouldn't have had to, diba?
No,
Parang,
no one, like, especially those who were victims of torture, they absolutely should not be having to relive the nightmare.
yeah.
Anyway, but my question is, like, how should we, um and then when I say we, parang our generation, hindi na tayo bata sa totoo lang. If we're gonna be very honest about it, we're not quite the youngest in this society anymore.
Yeah.
But how should we, like, the millennials, the Gen Z, without over exaggerating our role, no, in Philippine democracy. Pero syempre tayo na kasi talaga dapat tumatanda na
Yeah,
sila,
yeah.
napapagod na sila. How should
Mm.
we make sense of that? Na parang, 30, almost 4 decades after, they're they're leaving their houses again. Some of them going back to the streets literally. How should that inform what we do or what activists do now?
I guess yun na parang it's a rude awakening na the work
Yeah.
is never done in a way.
Yeah.
Like even when the Marcoses weren't back in power yet, like for within that 36 years, they still had a lot of work to do. Not just resisting fascism, but other modes of oppression that exist in society. Um, versions of that fascism manifesting elsewhere, things like that. So parang I feel like there is some awareness that the work is never done. Pero ang lala talaga nung bumalik, parang ano talaga siya, because that was your biggest fight nga. And
Yeah.
now parang it's like Voldemort is back.
Yeah.
It's like parang 'di ba, after Grindelwald, now you're dealing with another dark magician.
Yeah.
Parang ganun. I mean like
Yeah.
obviously I don't want to be reductive by using, film metaphors, but
Yeah.
you I feel like yun na parang it's hard to approach it. It's a hard to swallow pill talaga. Na
Yeah.
parang, because this should have been our fight, and it is our fight. So how did they get away with it? So there's a lot of guilt. I feel like did we
Yeah.
not do enough? Did we not push enough? Um, so may ganun feeling ko na sentiment. But at the same time, yun na nga parang um, I feel like in a lot of ways, it's not just them coming back into power. It's like a version of them that like exists in an entirely different realm altogether. Kasi wala naman tayong ganitong tools and obstacles before. Wala naman tayong Facebook,
Yeah.
TikTok, YouTube
Yeah.
where they could spread disinformation.
Mm.
So parang bagong battle talaga siya, and like
Yeah.
nangangapat pa rin tayo in terms of how we fight back within this new framework,
Yeah.
because we don't have their resources, and this framework is very parang like syempre nasa modern capitalist society na tayo na parang in order to get mileage on social media, for example, you actually need money, not just in
Yeah.
terms of producing content, but also in terms of boosting content
Yeah.
so it reaches certain places. You're fighting with algorithms, like um, mag-like lang yung nanay mo ng isang post that's vaguely pro bongbong. Parang lahat
Yeah.
ng posts na lumalabas sa wall niya ay pro bongbong na. Things like that. And
Yeah.
obviously, they're not playing fairly. They buy off,
Yeah.
Facebook accounts that have already amassed a following. So that's already automatically, an audience for them to preach to. And that takes money to be able to buy off those accounts, to pay off influencers, to pay off trolls, so things like that,
Yeah.
which we don't have. So nangangapa talaga tayo.
Yeah. Talking about the algorithm, it's quite, as in, I always knew that it was that easy to get into those hindi siya echo chamber eh. Bottomless pit
It's like
of
the deep
whoever.
web
Kasi,
of
I mean, it
misinformation.
happened to me during the campaign because obviously on Facebook, I had to monitor the uni team, right? So I had to
Yeah.
start liking pages and search for posts specific to them.
Mm-mm.
And the next thing I know, my feed is just all about them. And on the flip
Mm-mm.
side, then on TikTok, I think I was fed one or two like quick edits of, let's say, of the Lenny Robredo campaign. Next thing I know, puro Lenny Robredo lang naman yung laman ng TikTok algorithm. Kasi
Yeah.
it's parang funny haha siya sa first 3 seconds.
Yeah.
But like after at the fourth second, you're like, this is scary. Like
Yeah.
if
My
really,
realization.
di ba, imagine if you're an old, if someone who's not as adept sa social media or someone who's really young and
Yeah.
very impressionable, like
Or really
it's so
old.
easy, really old, really young, di ba, na
Yeah.
parang you'll start believing that this is the reality. This is reality period, right?
Yeah.
Kasi ito
Yeah.
yung ibang topic na hindi na yun, wala na yung kinalaman sa literature. Pero just to speak of, the
Yeah.
unique challenges.
Unique talaga.
Um,
As in, parang nasa point na ako na parang, yun na nga, parang like we all argue nga that, art nga is important, has an important place in shaping people's opinions and shaping people's consciousness. But at the same time, it's so easy to slip into this jaded conclusion that maybe, what's the point? Like everything is futile anyway.
yeah,
We're all going to lose like, to big Facebook
yeah. No,
because they have
but
customers.
it's the same struggle that journalists have, I think. Kasi
Mhm.
parang kung yung
Yes, of
struggle
course.
namin is how like hindi naman sa what's the point, but like yes, we kunwari you produce good journalistic work. If it doesn't reach the people who need to read it, parang sayang. And I think I'm sure that's a lot the sentiment of a lot of artists, right? Like
Yeah,
you produce work that you hope speaks to and speaks of our current condition, but if it doesn't reach the intended audience because of the algorithm, because of our little
yeah,
echo chambers, ang hirap naman nun. Paano?
yeah.
Not
So
may
yun
sagot
din.
dun, actually.
I feel like that's one of the unique challenges that I think the one that you brought up. Na parang
Mm-mm.
because creating art is at it, essentially content creation din siya. You're creating,
Yeah,
things that are to be consumed. And it's a matter of getting them from your echo chambers to an actual audience. And I feel like um, definitely social media, uh, capitalism, marketing, all of those things working together make it very hard for us to be able to reach unique audiences that haven't heard or don't already agree with us.
yeah,
So
yeah,
yeah, yun yung
yeah,
unique struggle I think in today's time na hindi naman nila kailangang isipin dati ni na
yeah,
Kapit, ni na ni
yeah,
na Joaquin even
yeah, yeah.
nasulat lang
It's
sila
it's the it's the monoculture. Parang monoculture normally sa pop culture yung context niya, pero I think relatable din siya in the sense
hmm.
in the context of this information. Anyway, ibang topic na altogether. Yung point ng whole show na to, podcast na to, is really to try to make sense of where we are. So ito hindi naman try to make sense of democracy, but when you try to make sense of your world, and I'm interested to hear what you consume. Like what movies do you watch? What books do you read when you need to make sense of what's happening around you?
Parang right now parang I feel like parang, it's important to be able to take in, a variety of things, not just the ones nga that are decidedly political, um, but also, ano ba mga, parang like, ano yung sinabi to ni Jericho Brown when he won the Pulitzer Prize for Poetry, na parang, the poems that saved him weren't the ones that were written specifically to save people. They were the ones that he felt most strongly and most deeply about. So I feel like may ganung power kasi ang art na
Yeah,
parang even when your film isn't didactic, isn't trying to preach a particular political agenda, even if that political agenda is well-meaning and, you know, um, good, parang, you don't get to decide how it impacts your audiences, I guess. And
yeah,
so when you have films, for example, this is a beef that I had with a recent film that came out, and I'm not going to mention the name of the film because I don't wanna because it's like essentially well-meaning anyway, and it had like from what I know, it had um it's like on the good side, kumbaga. Um, but also, yun na nga I always have this suspicion about artists who talk about who subjectify the oppression of a particular kind of people without doing anything to materially impact the lives of those people outside the medium. Like if you're going to talk about activists suffering, for example, the precarity that they experience in the hands of an oppressive um, system of oppressive forces, parang like it I can't help but feel suspicious every time that's the subject, and then I find out that the creator isn't immersed in the same struggle or hasn't done anything to disrupt the systems of equality and oppression that have excluded so many of the people who were subjected to that exact same kind of oppression from material survival. So meron ako mga ganong suspicion. I feel like in terms of we have to be circumspect in what
Yeah.
we valorize, not just in what we consume. Because we consume everything, we just have to have a healthy amount of criticism in us, right? But like when you put a piece of work on a pedestal, hoping that
Yeah.
it's our generation's response to this and that, to whatever notions of um, discipline and peace and security, things that are being propagated by the Marcoses.
Mm.
We need to be very smart about what we valorize, what we put on a pedestal, because that can represent the movement quite negatively, if ano siya,
Yeah.
kumbaga sa Bisaya pa ay parang, no, sa Tagalog pala, malabnaw. I can't think of the Bisaya word right now. Pero 'di ba, pag nipis, kumbaga, it's thin, it's not
Ah,
full-hearted. Um,
puro hangin ra.
Oo, so puro hangin ra. So parang 'di ba, it's going to capture the movement. It's going to stick as an important marker of history, as our answer to Maiden Malacanang is this movie, for example. And
Yeah.
if that movie isn't a good portrayal of the struggles of activism, for example, um, then might as well just be a movie about activism without being the movie about
Mm-mm.
activism that's being peddled by institutions.
Yeah.
There's that discomfort. There's that complicated relationship I have with
Yeah.
certain films, certain books, certain artworks, things like that.
Yeah. I like that. Be careful about what you valorize. Although I am a fan of, but this phrase sounds horrible in the context of the Duterte administration and even this current administration. Yung kill your heroes.
Yeah, yeah.
It used to be such an
Although,
innocent and it used to be such an innocent and
yeah,
parang
it used to
nga,
be a metaphor.
kaso ngayon kasi parang damn it, nagiging literal
Yeah.
yung pag-kill ng mga
Yeah.
heroes.
Ngayon ko lang yun na-realize nung binanggit mo.
Oo, like, dati kasi ako talaga, like, lagi kong sinasabi yan without even thinking, yeah, kill your heroes. But like,
Yeah. Mm-mm.
during the Duterte administration, I was like,
Or like,
maybe cut down the pedestals of your
yeah,
heroes.
yeah,
Or no more pedestals. Yun na lang siguro,
yeah.
no more pedestals.
Yeah.
Wala nang kill your heroes kasi baka maging
Mm-mm.
literal
Mm-mm.
in this context. But anyway, thank you, Alfonso, for your time.
Thank you,
We
Bea.
will be asking Alfonso for resources, like anything, further readings, for example, or yung mga nabanggit mo na work with indigents and things like that, so that our listeners and viewers can also
Mm-mm.
read up on there. Kasi this show gives people homework. The joke lang, hindi naman parate. But
Yeah.
thank you so much for joining us, and thank you guys for watching.
Thank you, Bea. Oh, yeah, ano lang siguro before
Ay, sorry.
we end,
Go ahead,
like,
go ahead.
like the Pizza Caba, the Pizza Caba thing, like parang
Yeah.
sorry, sobrang ADHD to bakit ako tumalon. Pero yung Pizza Caba was famous for Prometheus Unbound, which was
Yeah.
a poem that was published in Focus Philippines, which is a state-sanctioned literary page. They ran it in the pages. They didn't realize that it was an acrostic where each letter of the first letter of each line started spelled out Marcos Hitler Dictador Tita, which is now a famous protest line. So there you go.
Yeah. In case also people are wondering kung saan galing yun. Kasi the first time I heard it also, again, this speaks of the I don't wanna say the poor education, but the gaps in my basic education. I had no idea saan galing yun. Bakit Marcos?
So bakit tuta? Tuta.
Bakit sila na-string together? Like, what are these random words? And then it was, I think, only in college or even after college na parang,
yeah.
That's where it came from. So yeah, I will link to that. I'm not sure. But actually, nag-plug bigla Kung gusto nyong, ito na naman tayo, medyo elitist to na plug. Pero there are wonderful exhibits at the Arete in Ateneo.
Ganun lang. Well, dito lang po
Metro
ongoing.
Manila, nasa Quezon City. I think it's still ongoing.
Yeah.
I'll put it in the story page siguro. Andon, there's a specific call in the one of the exhibits of the photos of survivors of martial law. Some of them have unfortunately passed already. So may mga kwento din doon ng mga kamag-anak nila. So kung nasa Metro Manila kayo, kung nakatira kayo sa Metro Manila or dadaan kayo ng Metro Manila at may time kayo,
Mm-mm.
dumaan din kayo. May homework talaga itong show na to. But anyway, again, thank you, Alfonso, for joining us. Thank you. And that's this week's episode of 36 Years. I want to thank Alfonso again for indulging us with that hour-long interview. Again, I will link resources, hindi lang kay Lakaba, pero sa ibang mga bagay na binanggit ni Alfonso during our interview. For more podcasts, interviews, go to Rappler.com, visit our social media pages, and also our channels on YouTube, on Spotify, on Apple Podcasts. Listen to the other shows that are produced by Rappler. And I'll see you again soon. This has been Beko Pin. Thank you so much for watching or listening to this week's episode. Bye.